Or, okay.
Got it.
We always forget that.
I do at these groups, yeah.
I do
Sorry.
too.
Do remind me, anyone, before we start.
I think I saw the other. Oh, Carrie's saying something. You mute. Okay. All right. So I will start a PowerPoint. Jenna, is she here? I wanted to tell her that I really was trying not to kill people. I watched the Death by PowerPoint slide presentations, and I have many thoughts, but I try to adjust my slides, but at the same time follow Edwin's lead in terms of formatting, partially, as you will see. Okay. Trying to. Let's see if it works. Can you see the slideshow? Are you seeing?
Yeah,
you can see the slideshow.
good.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I think it would be helpful to have a formatting that's kind of similar across the sessions. So I just borrowed the one that Edwin used for the first two sessions. Maybe some reformatting would be helpful, but this is where I am. Okay, empathy is a way of being, like a diamond. This way of being has many facets, and today one of the facets we will look at is imaginative empathy. What is the connection between empathy and imagination? Since this is a module about defining empathy, how do we define imaginative empathy? And starting with the connection between empathy and imagination. There are two major currents of thought about connection between imagination and empathy. I've borrowed from the two most prominent names in that field. So fantasy is the word that Mark Davis used for imagination, and he positioned it in empathy. Even though you won't find the word empathy in the definition, he positioned it in empathy in the questionnaire he used. And he called fantasy the tendency to identify with characters in movies, novels, plays, and other fictional situations. Amy Copeland came obviously 20 years later, a little over 20 years later. She edited this volume on how do we define empathy, where both philosophers and psychologists were trying to find an answer to that question. And this is her definition. This is from her chapter in the book. I propose that empathy be conceptualized as a complex imaginative process through which an observer simulates another person's situated psychological states while maintaining self-other differentiation. So the difference between the two currents of connection between imagination and empathy is obvious. In the second one, empathy is seen as an imaginative process. So imagination holds that key role of what is it to empathize. A little more about imaginative empathy. It could be defined, it could be seen as the cognitive aspect of empathy. Later in this module, we'll talk about the affective cognitive model of empathy and compare it to our model of empathy. So instead of talking about cognitive, we could consider using imaginative empathy. I imagine the other, or I imagine myself in that other person's story. In other words, imaginative empathy is allowing us this opportunity to believe some stories that we've never heard before. So this is the attachment theory, pretty classical attachment theory in psychology position, which sees human functioning in two basic modalities. In one modality, we are afraid. We are connecting to others based on this fear of survival. And fear is the key word. We are seeing all the resources as limited, so we're fighting for life is this zero-sum game, and including communication. I'm competing. I'm looking at the other person, and I'm trying to compare. Okay, am I more or are they more? So a lot of our conversations and encounters would be based on this type of competition. I'm self-oriented. I'm thinking of myself. I'm thinking of myself when I approach the other. And therefore, the key word, the key component in connection with the other is power. Who has more power? Covey called this the scarcity mindset. The resources are just not enough, and we're playing the zero-sum game. However, when I feel connected, which is the other type of functioning, I'm approaching the other focused on them. I'm not thinking at this point about how do I look, what are my resources, what are my qualities. I'm focused on how do they feel, how do they they experience their own life. And because I'm connected and I feel safe, I'm able to play. So playfulness, creativity, curiosity are the words that could be used when we connect and we stay in that place of self-connection, safe connection, I'm sorry. And then and only then we could talk about intimacy in that place of trust. Abundance mindset is coming from this. There's more than enough, and we could rest in this. This is going to be the theoretical basis for the rest of this presentation. If I look at someone different from that posture of survival, I other them and inch towards dehumanization. But if I look at someone different from a posture of abundance, I see our common humanity. And I think it's important, especially when we talk about imagination, we talk about creativity and beauty. It's important to remember that empathy was born in that field that deals with beauty. It was a term in aesthetics. I'm not going to read it. I could allow Edwin to read it for us, but my German is non-existent. So it means feeling into.
Einfühlung.
Thank you. If I look at someone different, again, someone different from me, and different could feel threatening. If I don't know them, I can predict how they're going to act. But if I look at them from that deep posture of abundance, I could behold their unique beauty. I'm kind of in awe of what that person that's different from me holds. And I enjoy it. I'm standing and looking at them, kind of imagining what would it be like to be in their story. So the critics of empathy address the scarcity mindset. They are addressing a type of empathy, if it is empathy, a type of process that happens between two people, and that starts from that limited resources mindset. But imagination happens only in the abundance, when I'm connected and I could play. Imagination has no urgency to it, and it, in most cases, doesn't produce any kind of direct result. So in order for me to stay in that place of imagination, I need to feel connected, safe, and be allowed to play. So what do we do when we do imaginative empathy? Some research on imagination and empathy, by far the most abundant research, and I know here I need names, I will find some. I was able to talk to Crystal briefly this week as well, and she mentioned some role-playing games that she's involved in, and some other members of this empathy circle community. So I'm excited to hear more about that. But that is where most of imaginative empathy has been receiving attention so far. Reading fiction, obviously more about the connection. How does imagination encourage empathy? How does imagination help us empathize? And then theater and film. there's some research there, not much that I have found. So what do we need in order to practice imaginative empathy? We need that curiosity. We need to be in that place of creativity. We need to stay open to differences, again, stories that we've never heard before. And then we need to believe those stories, even if we've never lived them. And this is a slide that I borrowed from, or I stole from Edwin, Meryl Streep, who is, I think, one of the most brilliant actresses. The quote is, "I've thought a lot about the power of empathy. I'm trying to move so I can read it. Okay, I'll let you read it, because currently the screen is right on top of the words.
You want me to read it, or?
No, I think.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah. And then this one is going a bit further, because she had a goal to work to produce tools for people that are elderly, and she was not sure that those tools would be good enough from the way she was seeing the world. So the designer, Patricia Moore, that I had never heard of before, used different props, different ways to imagine what it would feel like to be elderly, and therefore what would the needs be when I am in that place, in that position. And this is very meta here. I wanted to find slides that represent different human stories. We talked about representation in I think the last 2 sessions. I probably could have if I spent more time on it, but I think this is a relatively easy thing to solve. I would appreciate any leads if you have any. But I really wanted to leave more time for the rest of our conversation. So I guess I'll stop here before I move on, and just ask, what are your thoughts? I would love some feedback. I'm gonna go back to the 2 definitions. If I stop here, is it becoming clear to you which of these approaches I'm taking when I define empathy? Did anybody, I mean, I talked to Lou, so he knows, but.
Yeah, and I'm going to stay relatively quiet because I gave you a lot of feedback already.
Yes, I appreciate it. I mean, any feedback, but I was curious about this specific.
Seems like you're doing both of them. Does my sense.
For me, Violetta, when I first saw the slide, just for me, there was so much information on it. I was trying to read it and listen to what you're saying. So conceptually, I was kind of lost from, at that point, and it took me a while to get back. And so for me, I would appreciate if you just have, if there's 2 different approaches, then one approach on one slide and
Okay.
The next approach on the others, and to give time to kind of assimilate one. And maybe with an example, I really would appreciate, and when you're describing Davis or Copland's approach, to actually give a specific example of each, just to compare, the similarities or the differences.
Okay. Wendy, that's very helpful. Was it? Oh, maybe if you couldn't make sense of the 2 definitions, then it would have been hard to follow the rest of the slides. Am I right?
Well, it just took me a while to kind of get back, and then then I started getting into your cognitive aspect, and then suddenly it went into, I wasn't clear about the transition into the attachment theory. There was suddenly this, I was just recovering from one load of it, and then suddenly the attachment theory, and I didn't kind of get immediately the link.
Okay. Okay. So my attempt to simplify things was came up kind of choppy because things.
Well,
But
I love
so
the fact
close.
sorry. I love the fact you started with the definition, great place to start. That was super. But then suddenly there was a lot. Yeah.
There was a lot. I have so much more. Okay.
Just getting started.
Yeah, what I could say about this slide is that it's kind of interesting how you have 21 years difference,
Mhm.
and that maybe in 1980 that's what empathy or imaginative empathy meant, and then it's kind of grown and become more complex over time.
Hmm.
I think Kara had something.
Oh, so I kind of just mimicked what Wendy was saying. So I thought I could tell that you worked really hard to simplify it, because some of these pages were like, here's a blob of information. I was like, oh yes, I hear you. And then other ones have so many words on it. So I think, not that I typically say add more slides, but in this situation, I would just add more slides and break that information so that it hits. And then here's one. And then kind of what she was mentioning, where all of the concepts come first, and then you were like breaking them down, and then you threw another concept in. Well, normally I kind of like that kind of wheel well experience. I think with the simplicity that you are perfecting in this, I like the idea of giving the concepts up front and then building upon them as you go.
Mhm.
If I could just add, I really like the imagination as the core of empathy and imagining the other. I do think that in an inequitable world, even in this session, like, it's clear who has more power, even in our own community here. And so I like using the word imagine over cognitive, because I think it speaks on a 5th grade level to empower everyone. And I also think that I really like Copeland's definition of imagination as the core of empathy. Although I am reminded of The Beauty of Mrs. Doubtfire in the movie with Robin Williams, and that it really allowed me to see a male's perspective as a parent. I just wish that there was a similar movie for men to see the challenge that women have in speaking and being heard. And to that extent, I also loved the diagram that you shared of coming from a place of scarcity or abundance. And one thing I would add is I think that competition and collaboration are the over cooperation. I think as we move people to collaborate over being competitive, that would be a good analogy to make in terms of certainly the corporate world, and even in politics or wherever we are. And yeah, those were. I love looking at someone from a place of curiosity. I think that's the strongest for me. That's what I do over a place of fear. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. I did think about the corporate world, because the corporate world has achieved the cooperation really well, especially the higher corporations, because they've read the game theory, and if they could afford higher educated people, they know that they will make their bottom lines will be higher if they cooperate. And I was wondering if I should include the game theory as well, but now that I hear you, no, we're not going into math at all, because this will complicate things further. But yes, I think that's so important. If the pharmaceutical companies were competing with one another, we would all have a much different life.
I do think the game theory is something that should be used. I mean, I will say that
You think?
James Carse's book, The Finite and Infinite Game, is, I think, a book that I would encourage everyone to read. It talks about continuing the play and not playing the zero-sum game. I think that speaks to people. It does to me. So, yeah.
That is the same mindset, the same position, just in interpersonal communication. So I'm trying to work from here to go and argue with Bloom and with other against empathy people. But I think I don't know if that's the point to do it, this training specifically, but thank you. Edwin?
Yeah, so you're just wanting feedback on what we've done,
Yes,
what you've
on
done so
everything.
far.
Yeah.
What was coming to me is to maybe make it more tangible is to start with the empathy circle, what happens in the empathy circle. So in the empathy circle, you have the speaker and the listener, and that's sort of that direct other-oriented empathy. And the part where I would see imaginative empathy come in is if we do role play in the empathy circle, right? We take on a role. So we kind of start with taking on a role, and that's the shift from this other-oriented empathy to an imaginative empathy where, we set a scenario and everybody takes on a different role. You're no longer yourself. You're taking on the role of someone else, or you can be a feeling, or you can be whatever, and those dialogue with each other. And then you sort of experience, and as a phenomenologist, you start with the experience, right, instead of the theory. So that's just one thing I'm thinking about.
I stopped here because I do want to talk about the empathy circle and what happens there, because okay.
Violetta, I'm just wondering, could you just show the slide before that one, please? Yeah. So how are you going to go from that to the attachment theory? What's the transition between that and your next slide?
To me, it's clear because I've read Bowlby, and Bowlby started as a cognitivist, and he said, the way we connect is built on our truth about who we are, who the other is, and what our relationship is about. So that's how I see empathy this whole time, as a mindedness. I see you as someone who is separate from me and have their own thought universe or feeling universe, your own story. So to me, there's no jump, but I understand that I've also spent lots of years in attachment theory. So what will help you connect the two? Maybe somebody who's kind of new to, or nothing would help you connect the two. It just they don't make sense.
Well, maybe just saying what you said just
Okay.
then.
Okay.
It's just like yeah.
Okay.
Then it becomes part of your journey of understanding, which you're kind of sharing with your audience.
Okay.
I saw Crystal speaking, but you were muted, Crystal.
I just wanted to say that I think for people who haven't had the knowledge and all of the academia that you've had, Mrs. Doubtfire is just a beautiful representation of imagining the other. And you could even show an image of that leading in so that people kind of have that frame of reference. Again, I just wish there was a movie. I can't think of one where a man played a woman and got to experience that for a good solid week.
There's Tootsie. Yeah, Tootsie's great. Yeah. That's not what I wanted to say, though. So can you go back to the 2 circles, please? Yeah, so I'm an academic, but I'm not a psychologist. I'm an anthropologist. And everything about this, and then when you said, this is where I'm coming from, this is the basis of everything for me. I mean, that I cannot relate to. I cannot accept.
Okay.
This is psychobabble.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I just have to be honest with you. I come from a different place.
Mhm.
I come from the place of the individual. And all of this here is just unfettered capitalism and dichotomies left over from the Enlightenment
Okay.
and more patriarchy.
Okay. Can you tell
Just
me why? DJ?
Well, it's a dichotomy, first of all. It's either or. It's either fear or curiosity. It's either survival or connection. And
Okay.
that's not a way of being. We're
Mhm.
not an either or beingness.
Okay.
Phenomenology is about the experience.
Hmm.
My experience cannot be put in this circle or that circle at any moment of time. Just those circles. Maybe it could be a fluid thing where
Mhm.
there's another circle in the middle,
Okay.
and that circle is the way of being. And the way of being has some overlap here and some overlap there, but the way of being is also completely separate from these 2 circles.
Okay.
And it's also 3-dimensional, right? So, and it's also multi-layered.
Yeah.
So it's much more complex than this. I understand you're trying to simplify,
Mhm.
but what I'm thinking is that this is supposed to be for people who don't know that much about empathy circles, don't know
Mhm.
that much about empathy. And there will be some people who can relate to this, but there will also be some people who are just like, that doesn't feel right to me.
Okay.
And so I think what we want to do is embrace everybody's beingness, especially when we're talking about imagination.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe stop labeling everything and just be about the experience. Because it really doesn't matter what books you've read
Okay.
if we're talking about other people coming in and having an experience, right? Because the books that you've read have no impact on their experience, right?
Okay. So we're coming all from different paradigms. So
Right.
that's part of the richness of this group, because I'm hoping, coming with respect and able to hear one another wherever we're coming from. This is based on biology. This is sympathetic versus parasympathetic functioning. So it's a really something that could not fully be. It is a dichotomy in our biology. It's either one or the other. I could start labeling things. I don't believe that's possible epistemologically, DJ. Even if it's just experience, we always use words, and words do come with labels. But I'm definitely ready to use different labels that would speak more and better to somebody that's coming with no thoughts about imaginative empathy. And part of my questions is, well, my thoughts, as I hear you, but also as I've been thinking about it, is maybe this particular module is not the best place to play out imaginative empathy. I'm not sure, but or play it out differently or explain it differently. Maybe just stick to Meryl Streep, Mrs. Doubtfire, and fiction and role-playing games. Could be.
Yeah, I'm not really saying that, Violetta. I'm really not. I think you're kind of misinterpreting what I'm saying. Labeling is different than naming.
Okay.
Naming has to exist because
Yeah.
our brains exist in naming. But naming is related to concepts, and concepts are related to experiences. And so it's fine for you to maybe have some questions for people based on your ideology, based on your epistemology or ontology of your psychological approach. That's fine.
Okay.
The
That's almost-
questioning will bring up their ability to name, their ability to have concepts, and their ability to relate their experience to your questions.
Okay. Do you have any
So it's not about throwing everything out that you know. It's about that connection between what you know
Mhm.
and what the other people are experiencing, right?
And that is the struggle, and that's why I'm asking for your feedback. And probably those of you that have worked with more empathy circles and have kind of a wider view of who are the people that are coming. So when I teach a class, for example, or when I work with a person, I know where they're coming from. I usually have kind of a preliminary conversation. So when I prepare material, I know who I'm addressing. But in this case, I'm confused. Okay, thank you, DJ. I'm not sure Kara or Edwin raised a hand first. Edwin did, okay.
Yeah, just in terms of this slide, fear and curiosity, they
Mhm.
in my body, they happen at the same time. I can feel them in different parts of my body, and
Okay,
they change from moment to moment, right? It's like my fear level can go up, my sense of connection, and it just
Mhm.
happens. Or I can be in a group and I feel a sense of fear towards someone else and a sense of
sure.
connection with someone else, and so there's kind of that aspect of it.
I
So
could take the slide away
Mhm.
completely and just stay with the rest. I'm not attached to it at all. I just thought it could be helpful, but if it's not helpful, let's remove it.
yeah, and just one more thing with the
Mhm.
imaginative empathy, the word imaginative empathy is used, you see it sort of coming up, like you had Meryl Streep, you have academics talking about it, but the academics put it into the term in a cognitive,
Not all of them, but yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
often, yeah, not all of them, yeah, but quite often, and the cognitive has a feeling to it. For me, it has a sort of a highly structured, mental controlled feeling to it, whereas the imaginative has more of for me personally, a creative, open,
Mhm.
sort of explorative feeling to it. And that's why I think it's a much better and actually much more accurate term than cognitive, because so that's why the term imaginative empathy is here to kind of organize that facet of empathy under imaginative, because it's so multi-dimensional. I can imagine myself being you. I can imagine myself being myself in your situation. I can imagine myself, being like Meryl Streep. I can imagine myself being this other person. I can imagine myself in the future. So I think that foundation of imagination is so much more accurate to and richer than that concept of cognitive.
Okay. But
And
it is
also the cognitive affective is putting it into that dualistic, right? It's putting it again into that dualistic world. So
right.
imagination is like, it has everything in it.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So you want to see more about that, Edwin? Is that right? You're suggesting that I could talk
It
more
might be
about
the experiential, starting with an
Mhm.
experience, because in the empathy circle, it's the role playing that is sort of a starting point for the imagination
Okay.
versus the
Okay.
direct listening to someone is sort of a direct other oriented empathy that's not necessarily really imaginative. It's sort of this direct mirror neuron, based experience.
Mhm.
Versus where you start doing role plays, and it is a different process that brings in an imaginative aspect. And there's a developmental part to it that babies, until they're about a year and a half old, they sort of experience the world directly, and there comes an age where they can start putting themselves in other roles. They can start imagining someone else. There's some tests called the Sally Ann test where they actually can show at one point children can't take the role of someone else. They see whatever I'm thinking is with the reality of how life is. And then at a certain point they say, oh, people have other ways of looking at the world, and they imagine themselves in that role and they see the world from that role. And that's a different experience than sort of that direct sensing into. And it plays out in the empathy circle too, if we do
Right.
add role playing. So, yeah.
That's going back to the cognitive aspect. Kara, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yes. Okay. So the slide with the 2 circles. Language wise, right? So what I'm thinking is, so this is a thing. This is just a thing. It's a part of the way our human bodies work. Our human bodies work a lot faster than necessarily our rational and speaking abilities do. So these things can happen, almost simultaneously, right? But when we say scarcity and abundance, we kind of put a negative and a positive. So language wise, what if we're thinking of imaginative empathy as a state of being, right? So we are either in a productive or an unproductive state of being. Neither is good or bad. Sometimes you need to be not productive and you need to rest and sit on that couch and drink that tea. And other times you need to run the marathon, right? Like neither is bad, but they're a way of being. And with each one comes a different way of being, right? So when we are aware of ourselves and aware of others, we can be empathetic and be in that abundance and expansive space, that productive space. When we are less aware of those things, then we are less capable of doing those things because we are not in that space, that place of being. And that makes you, so imagine if you could have it all and then get to choose to be in an abundant, empathetic space simply through the awareness that comes from, say, an empathy circle, which then ties it into the imaginative and all of that was my thoughts on that.
I want to make sure I understand. So you think that if an empathy circle is part of your experience, you will be able to, first you had a comment about scarcity and abundance mindset. It's not my dichotomy for sure. It's just how it's become very popular.
Oh yeah, you hear it a lot. Yes.
It came from Covey, who I dislike, but it's just so popular that I decided to refer to a popular concept. Productive, unproductive, however we want to call it, parasympathetic, sympathetic. You had comments on that. You said, okay, that one is negative, one is positive. Maybe drop that. Maybe think of more. An empathy circle will help me learn how to stay in that awareness so that I can choose to connect. Or sometimes choose not to connect to somebody and understand them and compete with them, all the things. So I have both modes available to me.
And imagine, if we're doing imaginative, imagine what a circle could do to that awareness, so you could choose which one you want, like intentionally, and how powerful that choice can be. And that's the magic of the empathy circles, is that it gives you that power, that awareness, that connection, whether you wanted it or not, to choose.
Okay. Thank you. Lou?
Yeah, I think the value of this thing you have on the screen is just and a lot of people have said this already, the awareness that if you are in a abundance mindset, if you want to use that terminology, you have more capacity for empathy. And so in relation to the empathy circle, it would be what helps people get into that mindset so they have more capacity. Or and my answer to that is safety is what helps them get into that mindset. So, and this is why it's important for the empathy circle facilitator to create a safe environment. The structure creates safety, and acceptance creates safety, wherever people are. So we don't criticize them. We don't, someone who's having difficulty reflecting, we don't say, oh, you're in a scarcity mindset. If you were in a more abundant mindset, you would be able to be more empathic. We just accept them wherever they are, and we listen to them empathically. And over time, they relax more, and they enter more of a curiosity. They could enter more of and have more capacity. So I think, I think that's the value of this thinking, is that, just recognizing that an abundance mindset makes people more empathic, and in terms of empathy circle facilitator training them, that awareness, and that creating safety and ways of doing that. And then I'd say it also relates to self-empathy, because the other way you create more capacity inside yourself is recognizing, oh, okay, I need to give myself some empathy because I'm not, I'm in a stuck place. So that's how I think this fits. And I had one other comment I want to make to Edwin, which is that, Edwin, what you were describing about people taking on roles in the empathy circle and role playing, that could be a very powerful thing, but I don't think of that as an empathy circle. That's not an empathy circle, that's something else. Because if you were a facilitator and you're running a circle, and the reflector, decides they're going to take on a role and be the person's critical voice, they're not giving him empathic reflection. They're now doing a role play. I mean, it's a different process. I don't think that's an empathy circle. I think you have to call it something different.
Colin had his hand up before. I don't know, did you want to continue with that, Colin? Hadn't heard from you yet, so I was curious.
Well, Luke kind of talked about what I was going to say. I was thinking along the lines of self-empathy, because that was what I was focusing on before, and how important it is to prepare before we go into an empathy circle, so that we're in that mindset. Let's just call it mindset, the right mindset, in order to be able to empathize. So it starts with practicing self-empathy and looking after our own well-being, self-care, all of that. So we do have a lot of choice and influence over being in that mindset that will allow us to exercise imaginative empathy. That's good to know that, although to varying degrees, depending on how much stress or trauma a person has. And yes, creating the safe space, and also a brave space where people are not afraid to open up and say what's on their heart. And also, what else did I want to say? And trust, how important trust is, and how that, I'm not seeing it there in that little diagram, but I can imagine it would fit there, the one on the right. And just the word safety or safe seems to be missing for me. Also, there's I'm thinking of the opposite of fear or whatever. Although curiosity might be the opposite of fear, I don't know. Yes, there were just a few thoughts, and yeah, on the role playing, what Lou was saying at the end, well, it's true. I take your point, Lou, that it wouldn't belong in the empathy circle format, but maybe, I don't know, for illustrative purposes, it might be possible to do. I have some practices as well as a work that reconnects facilitator. We also have imaginative practices like the 7th generation practice, where you go into the future and and talk to the ancestors of the current day. So you go 200 years into the future and you talk to the ancestors of today to try to build this empathy for the crisis that we're in at the moment. The climate crisis and all the other crises as well. It's a really powerful role-playing exercise, but it is a role-playing exercise. So I just wanted to put that out there, as if you do go down that route, there are practices from the work that reconnects that might fit in here. And going back to your first slide, I think you were asking us which side, could we tell which side you were leaning towards? And I think you told us before that you were a bit conflicted about the concept of imaginative empathy. So maybe that's why it can be a bit hard, or was a bit hard for me to decide which of these routes you're going down, because maybe that conflict isn't resolved. I'm not sure. And the other thing is, I'd like to know who these guys are. Who is Davis and Copeland, and why are you taking their definitions, and why not someone else's definition?
Mark Davis is the one who developed the most widely used empathy scale, the interpersonal reactive index. So he created 1980, and nobody has yet created any tool that has better statistical quality. So it's still widely used. Most empathy research is done using his tool. Amy Copeland is a philosopher, and she specifically was interested in empathy and edited one of the volumes on empathy.
Okay, maybe one line about each of them would help.
You think?
Just for
okay.
me.
Okay.
We're all different, but for me, that would have been I would have taken. It would have put my mind more at ease that these are the two types of definition that we should be looking at, and not a third or a fourth type. Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you, Colin. I appreciate it. The seventh generation was new to me, and it's really, yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you. Edwin, is that an old?
Yep, I got a question, comment. So how does imaginative empathy play out in the empathy circle? It's something we generally don't do, because we're usually doing direct other-oriented, listening to the other person, and you're just sharing, you're hearing the other person. We do imaginative empathy when we do the challenges, right? The facilitator in the training, the facilitator is imagining being a person who's causing trouble, right? They're to give a challenge to the person that's facilitating. So that's sort of an imaginative. I'm going to imagine myself being a person giving, a challenge to the facilitator, and so that's sort of an imaginative aspect. There's also, I told this story before, that in one of our empathy circles, what we were talking about creativity, and one of the participants said, oh, when I have a creative idea, my judgment comes in and I criticize my judgment and I just feel pain, so I just don't want to have creativity, right? Because it's just so painful whenever I'm creative. So we said, okay, well, let's do a role play. And so I became her creativity, someone else became her judgment, somebody else became her pain, and then we role play that, and I as creativity spoke in an empathy circle to judgment. And I said, well, I really enjoy creativity, it's a lot of fun, it really feels really good in my body. And judgment, the person role playing judgment, reflected back what they were hearing me say, and then judgment had its turn to speak too as well. So it's sort of that family systems dynamic is sort of a, kind of goes into this, where you take the different parts of yourself that are maybe in conflict or not, and you can role play it, but you role play it in the empathy circle, where the parts are, you're imagining the roles, as well as having an empathic dialogue. So you're sort of doing both qualities of empathy. And I had been thinking of adding another session to the facilitator training, which would be sort of a taster, just pointing to how empathy circles can be used in conflict. So we would set up a role play where the facilitator would facilitate a family that the parent, its siblings, the parent has just passed away. They left a couple $100,000, and that has to be divided among the children. And each of the siblings feel that they should get the full inheritance. So they're in a conflict about, why they should get it. And so you would facilitate this conflict. And that would be sort of imagine you're imagining taking on the role of the sibling, but still using the empathy circle aspect for having that dialogue. So, you know, the imaginative empathy is a way to identify that role playing, and I see that's how it's played out in the one way it's played out in the could be played out in the empathy circle.
Edwin, what Lou shared here, he shared with me as well when I was showing him my thoughts earlier. And I wonder, as we're thinking how to be most, did he disappear? Are you there, Edwin?
Yeah, sorry, I raised my hand and
Oh, okay.
that shifted where he was
Oh,
positioned.
gotcha, yes. So I see only 4 people. My thoughts are just like we're trying to make as laser focus, as helpful, as oriented towards our participants' content, we shouldn't ignore the process either. So if empathy circles are by definition places, as Lou was saying, where I come and be heard and then in turn hear others, I wonder if we add that layer of role playing, all of a sudden becomes something different. So honestly hadn't thought of that, but the more I think of it, the more I see it this way. And not that we can't add the role-playing layer, but I'm wondering how beneficial that would be, especially for people that would be novices in the concepts, in the skills, and even in the idea of culture of empathy. There's so much to be put into a training, but what will be really beneficial? So those are some of my thoughts. Lou, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think I do use imagination as a reflector in the empathy circle. So, you know, the what Edwin's describing about role playing, that's like another mode of using empathy is to inhabit a character or to inhabit someone who's doing a certain experience and then actually let yourself act out, you know, based on your imagining. Yeah, and actually I have some thoughts about that too, but I'm not going to share those. It has to do with acting process. But when I am in an empathy circle and I am listening to someone, if I cannot relate directly to what they are describing, I have to kind of engage my imagination. Like if I've never experienced what they're describing, I have to engage my imagination to say, wow, what might I be feeling if I were experienced what this person experienced? And I use that as a way of trying to connect more if I'm not feeling much of a connection to what they are describing, or I'm trying to sense what they might be feeling, or maybe I'm not sensing that they're feeling anything, and so I'm asking myself, what would I feel if I was in their situation, as a way of kind of guessing what they might be feeling, even if they're not showing it a lot. And then I might include that feeling in what I say to them, or I might decide not to. I might just be aware of it. But I would say that's the way that I use imagination. Yeah,
Okay.
And I guess I also use it to imagine. Yeah, I also use it to imagine what need they might be fulfilling, or what value they might be pursuing in doing what they are describing that they did. Because again, that's another way of like, well, I would never react that way in that situation. So, you know, so I'd start to have judgment come up in me like, why did they do that? Ha ha. So I use my imagination to, oh, well, what other way of looking at this might they be experiencing, or what meaning might they be making of it that's different than my own meaning?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another form of imagination that I would say that I use when I'm trying to listen empathically.
Thank you. I think this leads me to this conversation between the two positions. And my question, whether it became clear which position is happening, I'm definitely a lot more in a believer that empathy is an imaginative process to begin with. Even if I'm listening to somebody who is from my culture, from my gender, from with my education, whatever, I will still never be 100% accurate. I could never be 100% sure that I fully understand the other. And there needs to be this moment of imagining what is happening. And maybe it will be more accurate as I practice, hopefully, and as I practice my imagination and grow in my imagination. But it will be arrogant to say that at any point I could fully understand what the other person is feeling, thinking, needing. And if that's my posture, I need to stay in that position of curiosity and humility, that their story is their story, my story is my story, and we are approaching one another as to the best that we can. But we thought, when Edwin and I were speaking about it a long time ago, we thought that it's a lot more easy to approach is to talk about imaginative empathy as this tendency to identify with characters in movies, novels, and plays, because that's more what has been done so far in fields of imagination. So that's where Meryl Streep, Mrs. Doubtfire, and this kind of role playing, and this would be the empathy circle experience that I haven't prepared it, but I'm going to offer it to see how that feels. So this is the more narrow definition, is that this is all that imaginative empathy is. It's just when I'm trying to empathize with fictional characters or characters that I don't know or probably don't meet physically. But what Lou was saying is that probably that actually more wider definition of connection, imagination, empathy, that empathy is an imaginative process, does have a place in the empathy circle, but could be communicated differently. So, as I said, this is a very, very better version. And I think part of this discrepancy is that I tried to create a presentation from a point of view that I am not fully on board with, thinking that the other one would be bringing even more complexity and would just not be beneficial for people that have never heard of empathy or imaginative empathy. By the way, I'm not able to read all the chats. I'm sorry. What, if you don't mind sharing it in the circle? For some reason, the chats, I see that there's a chat and then it disappears from my screen. And I'm looking, oh, okay, I found it. So there's a lot said here. DJ shared the Humans of New York website, which I enjoy. And then Crystal offered chart, probably the two circles chart. She talked about the power distance characteristics and how they connect to individualism and collectivism, the cultural aspects, self-concept, concept, motivation, perception, emotion, and cognition. Inside an empathy circle, so that visually shows how all is one and one is all. One in, okay. Believe stories we've never lived. That was part of one of my slides. Crystal, I'm not quite sure what you mean. And Colin, like, okay, maybe you liked it, maybe you like that part. And that is the key to imaginative empathy. That's what I'm trying to communicate the whole time. And that's going to be my next slide. Openness replaces projection. Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm hoping I made sense, but that was the struggle between the two ways to see imaginative empathy, as just taking on a role, or as imagination being kind of the key component and place of humility as I'm approaching the other story, the other person. Okay. Am I missing somebody who wanted to speak? I don't think so.
No, but I just heard something and I have to ask you this. So you just said, well, what imaginative empathy really is. And I
Yes,
didn't
that's
catch the whole sentence, but I want you to remember what you just said so I can get it down. It was really good.
It's allowing us to believe stories we have never heard before or we have never lived. I think that's what I see as the basis of empathy in general. And I think what allows us to do that is when we feel connected to the other, hence the two circles. But they could definitely disappear. The attachment theory seems to be jumped to the side, and we don't need it in this.
Well, and whether you just get rid of it or not, having the two ideas and then the two images and then tying it all together with, but what really I'm saying is.
Okay.
So swapping those,
Mhm.
that makes sense, because I think you hit it on the head right there. And so this is like hey, here's some concepts and here's some more concepts. Did you know there's a lot of concepts about empathy out in the world? So what we're talking about here is.
Okay. And or I can just leave this and then not bother with the others. Okay. Which still leaves the whole treatment, and that is my major question to the group, the whole treatment of imaginative empathy open. Do we treat it as role-playing video games or role-playing games that are in person, reading books or theater and living imagination there? Or do we use more what Lou was talking about? I use imagination in the empathy circle when I'm reflecting, because some of the stories I hear are very different, or reactions are even sometimes surprising. So what do you think? I guess that's my biggest question, if you have any thoughts on that. Edwin has a thought?
Yeah, when you're talking about imaginative empathy, it's almost like you're saying imaginative empathy is empathy, is kind of my sense. Yeah. It's like it's all empathy is imaginative empathy. And I'm seeing it a bit different, that there is a direct empathy. You could call that mirror neurons, based on mirror neurons. When I see an action and do an action, the same neurons fire in my brain. So there's a direct line, and you're a fan of Dan Zahavi, who's a big phenomenologist, and that's what he would say, that empathy is that direct. It's what Rogers is talking about, a direct being with someone, sensing into, and you could say that happens through at the basics through a mirror neuron sort of experience. But that's kind of what I'm seeing, and I see that the imaginative is adding another layer to it. It's sort of a developmental layer as well. So I see the two as having difference, but the imaginative is very rich. It's like if I'm sharing a story in the empathy circle and I'm imagining myself in the future, I say, oh, Edwin, I'm going to be working on my fence, and I'm going to fix this fence, and I'm imagining myself doing the fence, and I'm sharing that story. I'm sort of sharing this imaginative self-empathy sort of story. And then and like Lou's saying, that you can also be listening to someone and you're having direct empathy, but you also have that imaginative aspect too. Like, I'm not quite sure what they're saying here, but I'm imagining. So they're so intertwined, sometimes it's hard to, sort of take them apart. But developmentally, there's, studies that kind of that show that there is a difference between the two, and that they're, and you can't be rigid about there's this or that. They can kind of flow in mix in with each other. But I do think it's helpful to have the imaginative empathy as a concept versus cognitive empathy, because the cognitive empathy is just so dry. I think it's a block to the empathy movement, because it doesn't capture that imaginative aspect, and it would be so much more. It feels more creative. Imagination has all your feelings, your whole felt bodily experience. So it's so much of a richer term than, cognitive. And yeah, so that's my thoughts about it. And we still have that difference. You're still firmly like, it's all imaginative. And I'm here with, well, there's two parts to it and they overlap. So I think there's sort of that difference in our views there.
Maybe I've studied the mirror neurons a little more. So yeah, I have thoughts about that. Okay, Kara? Did you raise your hand or did you need to?
I did. Well, so my question to you is, what if, sort of to Edwin's point, they're so interconnected, and it's sort of a development layered awareness thing. What if they aren't separate? What can you do with it if you make it all part of the circle?
That is the question. So my plan for the rest of the session was, and I don't know if we'll have time for both, first to go into an empathy circle and talk about where each one of you is. I would love to hear again each one of you. When you think of imaginative empathy, how you're thinking about it. And then the next one was to try a role play. Probably we won't have time for this, but I think it's fine because we'll probably have another round of trial sessions. So then we will have a little better, I think it's a lot more important for me to hear what imaginative empathy is rather than jumping to the exercises, which will be a lot of fun, but will be more helpful later. What do you think, Lou?
I just wanted to say that for me, the cognitive part of empathy is the meaning. So trying to understand the meaning of what someone is saying and reflect that back to him, and the other part, the non-cognitive part, I forget the other word that they're using for it, is the feelings. How do they feel about what they are describing? What emotions do they have? So to me, those are the two components that I try to sense and that I try to reflect back, or I at least sense them. I may choose not actually to reflect them. Some people don't like having their feelings reflected back. Yeah, it's too intimate for them, or they're ashamed of their feelings, so they want to deny them. But yeah, so for me, that's those two. So it's not cognitive, or I forget what the other one Edwin was saying, the other word.
Imagination.
I think it's both. Well, yeah, the feeling component is definitely not cognitive. You feel it in your body, and it's an emotion, so it's not cognitive. The cognitive part of empathy for me is the meaning. What does it mean to the person?
Yeah. As we were talking about earlier, we all come with different paradigms. And I think we can enrich one another and find a product or kind of a process that will be refined further and further. And as we meet one another, we'll probably be able to persuade one another and grow one another, but also some things will not change. And then the question will be, who will be the final sanction? And part of that conversation was that it is Edwin's project. So that's why I'm trying to do it from his idea of what imaginative empathy is. Not that I'm not open about where I stand, but that's how he sees it. And that's how I think might be most beneficial to put it in the empathy circle once I figure out how to do it in a beneficial way. That doesn't feel inauthentic to me. So I could actually, feelings effective. Colin says yes. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move to an empathy circle? My summary is that first, there's a lot of work left in myself and also obviously on these slides. Somebody wrote a...
Yeah, so I just put something in the chat. I kind of was struggling of how to define empathy from an anthropological perspective versus the psychological perspective that's so dominant in the empathy circle. And of course, I accept that. Of course, people have different points of view, of course. But I put this definition in the chat because I think it helps you understand where I have trouble, because it's the idea of defining empathy as understanding and emotionally connecting with another person's experience from their perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not from their emotions, not from their thoughts, from their perspective.
Right.
And perspective is worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said earlier, it's impossible to really do that 100% and to do it unbiased,
Mm-hmm.
and to do it with valid research tools. And
Mm-hmm.
so anthropologists know it's an impossibility to reach this, right? But we
Yeah.
have to try. And we have to remember that it's even more important when that person's perspective is different than our own. And that's where we have to be self-reflective
Mm-hmm.
and cognizant of our own biases,
Yes.
because it's our biases that stop the empathy from happening, the understanding from happening, right? And we live in a biased world. Most of the things around us, most of the systems that are racist and misogynistic and patriarchal and unjust are based on people believing that they're totally right in their biases, right? And that's the imbalance of empathy, right? That's when we get into trouble, when we say, oh, empathy is being in someone else's shoes. So I'm going to give like all this money to help these poor children. I'm going to be a big donor. I'm a white person giving to a white organization, but I feel good about it. I'm helping to solve these problems, when really they're part of the problem.
It's
So,
all about,
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I like about the empathy circle, is that it puts everybody equal.
Mm-hmm.
Your empathy isn't better than my empathy. Your perspective isn't better than my perspective. Your emotions aren't better than mine. Your ability to be an academic isn't better than mine. We all are who we are, and we're 100% equal. And nobody has the hierarchy or the superlative. That's the beauty of the empathy circle for me.
Yeah, I love that, DJ. That was part of mostly what I wanted to communicate with imaginative empathy. So, yeah. So this is kind of the core of how I see empathy in general, but also the idea that my story is mine. So no matter what kind of a superhero in empathy you are, you will never live my story, because you can't be moment to moment in my story. But I also need to be heard. And that need that I have is just as strong as my need to breathe. So Colin said in the chat that empathy is bias. People empathize more easily with those to whom they can relate. This is Bloom's point, based on similarities such as a shared background, history, values of interest. The length and depth of the relationship may further influence the quality of the empathic experience. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where imagination comes in the humility of I don't know, so I'm going to try to make that step. I think everybody who's trying to learn to become better empathizer knows that it is possible. Edwin?
I had a quick comment about that it's with empathy is biased. It's not that empathy is biased, is that bias blocks empathy. And people have maybe, if they're intimate, if they know people well, they have less of a block to them empathizing. And in the empathy circle, we have people from everywhere in the world. We have conservatives, we have, Democrats, we have the full spectrum, and people can hear each other. So I think that like, DJ is saying, the empathy circle says the first thing you do is listen to the other person. And that sort of, counters people's inherent, like in-group bias. So I think it's a misunderstanding of it's not the empathy itself is biased, is that people are blocking their empathy, and that block, be it out of fear or whatever, or, self-centeredness is the problem with this empathic connection. So I just had to respond to that because I hear that same, criticism all the time. Like, oh, empathy is biased. That it's not the empathy that's biased, it's the bias that's biased, So anyway,
Okay.
feel strongly about that because I argue with these people all the time who are saying that. So yeah.
We all have strong feelings, which is great. Okay. Gosh, we have 30 minutes, so maybe it will be just one round, if that is okay. Edwin, is your hand still raised? Or okay.
No, it's not.
No, okay. So Crystal said, since implicit bias lives in our subconscious, it can be hard to spot. Sometimes all we need is a moment to pause and reflect honestly on our thoughts and behaviors. Absolutely. My position is that imagination is what helps us be able to reflect honestly with a bigger repertoire of thoughts, words, experiences, felt experiences, including. How many of us? Look, could I ask you to lead the next conversation, please, so I could take notes?
Sure.
To do an empathy circle on what is imaginative empathy. Now that we've talked about it, what does it sound like to you? That's my question. And I'm going to take notes.
And you want an empathy circle, or you want just
Yes,
conversation?
please. A circle.
Okay.
I'd love to.
Like 3-minute turns, or what?
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, we half an hour.
Okay. All right. So who would like to go first?
I'll go.
Okay.
Speaking to you.
To me? To me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think this is really, the topic of empathy is very complicated. You can see that, everybody's kind of talking, has different viewpoints. And it's sort of the process that we're doing here, I think, is what kind of helps create, personal clarity. It's like an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, so you're just kind of recognizing or appreciating the empathy circle process of people listening to each other and expressing different points of view. You think that creates richness, and that's actually a reflection of the kind of learning that happens in the empathy circle.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a Tower of Babel, in terms of what people are meaning by empathy. And like when I'm reading, about empathy, it's like, maybe some article, I don't even know what the people are really meaning by it, because they have like whole different concepts. And so people are like really talking past each other.
Yeah, so your experience of reading a lot of different things about empathy is that it's a Tower of Babel, and that you see people kind of missing each other in their understanding of one another. And I think you feel a little bit that way too, confused about all the different, how different the points of view are.
Yeah, and well, there's one academic, Dan Batson, who's written a lot about empathy for, 30, 40 years. He laid out, how people are using the term. And he basically says, all you can really do is define empathy the way you see it, be very clear about it, and stick to it. And that's and that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say, here's what we're seeing as empathy, try to come to some sort of a mutual understanding, just stick to it. And then be able to compare that, see the overlap with other definitions.
Yeah, so you think it's important to just be clear about what we think empathy is in the context of the empathy circle, and to be consistent in saying that, and not worry about the plethora of different definitions.
Yeah, it's not so much worry about it, but be able to compare, and that's what we're going to do in the 7th session, is compare, this model with other models and just see how they compare with each other.
So you don't want to ignore the other definitions. You think it's important to compare what the definition we're using with other definitions.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit of I'm creating a table for that, and it's a little bit of a Rosetta Stone, right? It's like, okay, this is what I mean. I see what you're meaning here, and here's how that fits with the bigger, in a bigger, in a bigger picture.
So you're in the process of creating like a table that compares the different definitions of empathy, and you're hoping that can be used as a reference for
Yeah.
people to see how what they think it is different than what other points of view are.
I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Okay, great. So can I suggest, Violetta, that you stop sharing your screen so that people can see each other more? Okay. I'll go to Crystal. So actually, I have said a lot about what I think imaginative empathy is pretty specifically, and I don't want to take time. I don't see any purpose in taking time to say it more, so I think I don't have more to say.
Okay, so you're sharing that you don't have more to say, that you've shared your thoughts on imaginative empathy and what you believe it means, and you're feeling complete.
Yeah, actually, having said that, I will say that what DJ posted in the chat for like anthropologists and how they define it, that's exactly how I see it too, and it sounded like what I said. So I am curious whether if DJ thinks what she posted is different than what I was saying, because I felt totally aligned with what she said.
Yeah, and you're wondering what DJ's thoughts are in terms of your share, and that you felt like her words were reflecting what you intended to say, and is there a connection or a disconnection? You're curious.
Thanks. I feel heard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. DJ, would you be my listener?
Sure.
Yeah, I am going to speak to what's just coming up for me in the moment. As I listen to people who have been part of this movement for a long time versus those of us who are new, I have some thoughts. DJ.
So you're just going to speak to the moment and what's going on for you right now, what's alive for you, and you're going to speak to what's been going on. There are people here who have a lot of experience with the movement, and there are some people who are new to it.
I think it speaks to the power dynamics that I was alluding to in the text that Marie Fitzduff addresses in her book, Our Brains at War.
And this relates to the power dynamics that you were alluding to earlier. And this is Maria's, what's her name?
Fitzduff, yeah.
Brains at War.
Yeah. And how sometimes there's a disconnect when we're talking and when we hear people sigh or roll their eyes, and how empathy gets lost in the translation.
And sometimes when people sigh or roll their eyes, empathy gets lost in that translation.
And I think it's that othering, that role-playing would really help Violetta in terms of working on this, even for those of us who have been here for a very long time, and those of us like me who haven't. Yeah.
And you think that this idea would really help Violetta's imaginative empathy and role-playing, and it would help people who've been around for a long time and people who are new.
Because I do think the first definition, that looks at imagining it like the Wizard of Oz mentality, that is like a childlike, where you're projecting onto others. And I do think that, when you then move to imagining the other, it's a deeper level of awareness.
So you're thinking about the Wizard of Oz mentality, which is more about projection, and that we're moving towards more of a time when empathy is what? I'm sorry.
It's the collective, and I think it's the power dynamics that I even see at play in our own group here, that this is Edwin's movement when we're all here showing up to support him. And it's the power dynamics that concern me.
So it's the power dynamics that concern you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about this collective consciousness.
Yes.
And you see the power dynamics playing out even in this group here, where people are referring to empathy circles or defining empathy as Edwin's thing, when we're all here contributing.
And just in closing, I think that Jeff Weiner says it best at LinkedIn: follow the movement, not the leader, and the mission. And I think we're all here to follow the mission of increasing empathy, for better or worse.
So you're quoting someone who has some leadership writing, and you said that it's not about following the leader, it's about following the movement, and that we're all here for the mission of spreading empathy and making it better.
Thank you. I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Okay, good. Thank you. Hey, Jana. We just started an empathy circle. Yes, so I'm going to ask Violetta, yeah, if you don't mind, to be my listener. Okay, okay, sure. So, yeah, thank you, Violetta, for this very stimulating discussion and presentation. You know, I really empathize with your, you know, sort of hesitation and your sort of being unsure. That I relate to that part of you, and I hope that you know that everything that I've said is with deep respect for you.
Thank you. So you are relating to my hesitation and being unsure about my presentation and how to present imaginative empathy.
Yes, and I can't really speak to Lou's comment. Other than that, when I wrote that in the chat about the anthropological definition of empathy, it was so general, you know, it's so general that I kind of figured you can't really disagree with it, you know what I mean? Yeah, so I didn't put it in there to be controversial.
So the definition that you put in the chat about what is empathy, coming from anthropological perspective, it was so general that you're not expecting most people here would disagree with it.
Right, and I do want to say something else, and I'm going to go ahead. I already typed it, and I don't know whether it's going to come across very clear because I really don't see very well, to be frank with you. And it's so small. It's so small. But yeah, the idea is that, you know, all of these arguments against empathy, you know, Bloom's arguments, you know, this is in response to that. Okay, so the idea is that Bloom's against empathy, he's really just like talking about sympathy. He really isn't talking about empathy. So we can just like forget him. Okay, and so the people, so I'll stop there.
So you typed up something in the chat. You're not quite sure if it fully makes sense because it's so tiny, it's kind of hard to read. But going back to Bloom's criticism of empathy, you think he's really not talking about empathy at all. It's rather sympathy. So why don't we just forget about his criticisms and move on? Do you want me to reflect what is in the comment, or you will talk?
You want to read it?
I could read it. Yeah, of course.
That'd be great. Thank you, Violetta.
Anthropological empathy accepts that I do not hold all of the experiences in the world. Empathy accepts that I haven't lived your life. I don't know how you feel. So all I can do is be comfortable with that fact that I don't know, be comfortable with that ambiguity. From Philanthropy Without Borders, that's probably an organization, I've never heard of it, by Calliope Glaris, in response to notions about sympathy and the golden rule. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I didn't quite reflect it, but
That's okay.
something.
Yeah. I just wanted to give credit where credit was due, that
Okay,
I didn't write
yes.
that. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I will go to Colin.
Sure.
And I will kind of use loose trick and say I've said all I could about imaginative empathy, and I would love to hear what the rest of you think about imaginative empathy after our heated discussion today.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you're following in Lou's footsteps, and you'd really like to hear all of our opinions right now on imaginative empathy. Okay. So where to start? Maybe just
you
with
pick a
what
reflector, please?
very good tip there. Sorry, Jana, can you be my active listener, please?
Yeah, I hope I have.
Are you sure? Or if not, I will
I
pick
think so.
Cara.
Yes, I don't know how long. Yeah, go ahead. Let's try.
Okay. So I just wanted to start off by saying that, like what Edwin was saying at the beginning, that we should come to some kind of a definition of empathy, and that we all agree on to some extent, and then to stick to that.
So you're saying that we should come to some agreement about a definition of empathy and then try to stick to it.
If that's possible, because I have some doubts, I guess. And what I also would like to say is that I think there's an opportunity to bring a bit of fun into the experience, into the Defining Empathy course, so whatever you would like to call it. That's not to trivialize imaginative empathy, but I like the idea of having a bit of fun and lightheartedness, whether that's in terms of a role play or whatever shape or form that might take.
And regarding the prior defining empathy, we should reach agreement if it's possible. And you think it would be good to bring some lightheartedness into defining empathy via something maybe interactive, like role playing and imaginative empathy, or any other way?
I don't want to take away from the seriousness of what we're doing. That's not what this is about. It's just maybe to have some variety, and just to have, but not all to be really heavy.
And you don't mean that to detract from the seriousness of defining empathy, but you also think it could add to some variety and variation.
And I'm not sure who mentioned about living with uncertainty. Maybe it was DJ, but this is something that I try to practice as a coach, something that I struggle with in a coaching context, to be comfortable with uncertainty. And I think that imaginative empathy can help me there with that.
And regarding being comfortable with uncertainty, that maybe DJ mentioned, that's something that you try to practice as a coach. And what was the second part?
And that imaginative empathy can help me with that.
And that maybe, and as far as being comfortable with uncertainty, maybe imaginative empathy can help you realize that.
Right, by accepting that I can't know exactly what's coming next, or what direction the client is going in, or what questions to ask next, to accept that, and just to use my to use my imagination to process that uncertainty.
And so, not anticipating exactly like where the client is going, but being open to whatever arises in the client, and that maybe imaginative empathy can help you be comfortable with that.
Yes, thank you. I feel fully heard.
And, Crystal, you want to listen to me?
My pleasure. Thank you, Jenny.
I'm sorry, I came late. I would have liked to be here. I really missed this. I will watch the video.
Yeah, so you're acknowledging that you were a few minutes late and you're looking forward to watching the video.
Yeah, and an hour and a half late. Yeah, so what are we discussing?
So the topic is, what is imaginative empathy?
What is imaginative empathy? So I was really curious to learn more about fantasy, because in Tibetan Buddhism, the imagination is very, very important. It's part of Vajrayana practice. It's part of the, I don't know, I guess you could call it the advanced fast path to enlightenment.
So you're talking about how in Tibetan Buddhism, that imagination is the path to enlightenment. It's
Yeah, and I
part
need
of
to
the path.
Yeah, the advanced fast track. So I have to get up, I don't know, so and come right back. So I don't know if you want to wait or someone else can.
I actually already spoke earlier, so I don't know if Wendy or
Okay,
Ellen.
so I'll be right back anyway.
All right, so yeah, so Crystal, just pick someone to
Wendy?
speak next. Wendy?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you. And I'll pick Cara. Would you be my listener, please?
great.
I'm listening.
So I think for me, imaginative empathy at the moment, because I see definitions as being a bit fluid, it's the part of my empathy that allows me to visualize, to embody, to listen to the point of view, to the feelings of someone else.
So I heard that for you, imaginative empathy is your ability to listen into somebody else, their thoughts, their feelings, as well as their words.
Yeah, to visualize.
Visual.
Yeah. And I noticed in my body when Violette was wondering whether to ask us to do an empathy circle about the definition, and as opposed to doing some role play. And I was just longing for you to choose the role play. I wanted to get out of the cognitive and into the visceral.
And when it was asked whether we wanted to do a circle or role playing, you were really hoping for the role playing so that you could get out of your head and just try things.
Yeah, because I really enjoyed this, this session today. I really value, Violetta, all that you've done, incredible. But for me, it's been very, very head orientated.
And you've really enjoyed today and everything that Violetta brought into it, but it has been very, very head oriented for you today.
And I shouldn't have used the word but, because that kind of, I appreciate that there are many ways of exploring imaginative empathy, and for me, the word imaginative implies getting out of my head more.
So you're taking back the word but. What you meant was, I really enjoyed everything that happened today and everything that Violetta brought. And for you, imaginative means getting out of your head and into a whole experience.
Yeah, it's that visceralness that I feel is important.
It's the visceralness that you feel is important.
And I will ponder a lot more, Violetta, but I don't know whether you want send us the slides, because there was so much in there, and it would be useful for me to reflect a bit more because of this. Yeah, if you could do that, would be helpful, I think.
And you will ponder more of this and would love to get a copy of those slides to be able to ponder on them.
And yeah, I really appreciate, I was going to say, I appreciated that focus on empathy being allowing us to believe the stories we've never actually lived. And then also that connection that Edwin was saying, well, hang on, if is that a definition of imaginative empathy or empathy generally? So it's seeing where they divide or stay the same.
And you really enjoyed seeing the way that the definition of empathy is both its own thing, but also connected to these other things, and how it's more than just one thing.
Yeah, I feel fully heard, Cara. Thank you so much.
Yes. Edwin, are you the only one who hasn't gone?
I haven't listened. Yeah.
Okay, will you be my listener?
Yeah.
Okay. Imaginative empathy, after listening to all of this, which I loved, and I loved the passion that everybody brought to this topic. I think that our imaginations are deeply personal, and when you talk about it, it gets deeply personal.
Yeah, you love the conversation, especially the passion there, because that's personal. It's personal, and personal is passionate.
So I think that for me, imaginative empathy is that imagining that we are all just meat suits full of hormone soup who have survived trauma and drama and arrived to today.
I don't think I quite got that. That it's imagining that we're meat soup and that we're all holding this trauma. We just arrived today, so it's imagining that. Is that?
Yeah, it's imagining removing all of those things that make it so deeply personal, and being able to empathize with the reality that we are more alike as a human race than we are different.
So it's really about imagining that we're more alike than we are different.
Yes, it's for me. The imaginative empathy is imagining that regardless of what brought us to this table, I can still see you, I can still hear you, because I imagine that we're connected because we are both human beings.
So it's really about imagining, even though we're different, that I can imagine you being, and because we're different human beings, but I can imagine you.
Yeah.
And that's like the core.
And I can imagine that your experience is just as deeply personal and passion inspiring as mine is, and they may be vastly different, but the fact that they're both so deeply personal is a connection in and of itself.
Yeah, so wait, could you say that again? I just
The fact that your experience is so deeply personal and so very vastly different for you than it is for me, that in and of itself is its connection, because mine's the same way for me.
Yeah, so just knowing that people's experience is so vastly different from each other, just knowing that is sort of the case, that is a connecting quality, knowing about those differences.
Yeah, and I think we covered all of that and then some in these slides, and I cannot wait to see where Violetta takes all of this information and what she does with it.
Yeah, so you think that was covered, all these aspects were covered in those slides, and you're really having curiosity where Violetta's going to be taking this.
Hopefully heard. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think that was everyone. Jenna, did you have, I don't think, didn't finish, or do you
No,
feel
she didn't.
complete?
Yeah, and who wants to listen? I mean, who needs to listen? Crystal, you keep listening?
Why don't you reflect her, Edwin?
Okay, so
Go ahead, Janet.
I'll listen.
So, one way we deal with our own discomfort or remove our own unhappiness, I guess, just to say it kind of broadly, whatever that might be, is to visualize ourselves as angelic, Buddha realized, perfect, like that. And when you visualize yourself as comfortable, as free of discomfort, as then you start practicing and inhabiting a new way of being. So
Can I
that's
reflect that? So, like with the Buddha saying that you imagine yourself or yourself as being happy, and then by having or angelic, and by imagining that, you sort of start to live that, become that.
yeah, it's kind of sometimes you say that you fake it until you make it.
Fake it until you fake the happiness until you make it.
Yeah, and the Buddhism has all kinds of precious tricks or practices, and one of them is, if you make a mistake, then there's a mantra for that.
And it's a one way of doing it. If you kind of make a mistake, you have a mantra that kind of helps you, kind of sounds like fix that mistake.
Yeah, it's a purification mantra. So it purifies, whatever went wrong. So that, it's a practice of acceptance, of self-acceptance, and of self-improvement.
So you use the mantras to sort of correct the mistake and fix it and have self-improvement.
Yeah, so that's a very powerful and very important use of fantasy or imagination.
So you're actually using fantasy and imagination in doing that. I think you're meaning in terms of imagining yourself being happy or being enlightened or being that you just imagine yourself being that way. You hear sort of, you're not always there, but then you get, you have mantras that kind of bring you back to that.
Yeah, well, you visualize, and there are mantras, and so you're purifying your body, speech, and mind. You're perfecting body, speech, and mind all together.
Yeah, and those mantras kind of purify your body, mind,
and in terms of empathy with others, empathy with all others, that includes fish, it includes anybody, cockroaches. I'll put it in the chat, but everyone wants happiness and no one wants suffering. So in that sense, we're all having a human experience.
Yeah, we can empathize with fish and cockroaches, and they all want to be happy. So we can sort of empathize with that desire to be happy.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting me have a turn.
Okay.
Thanks, Jenna. Okay, so Violetta, I'll give it back to you. We have 7 minutes left.
Yes, thank you. I don't really know what to do with 7 minutes, but thank you all for participating and being generous with your time and energy and passion. I appreciate that. Crystal put it in the chat. You don't think your way into a new way of acting, you act your way into a new way of being. Reid Hoffman. Probably that's a continuation to Jenna's thoughts. I don't know what I'm going to do with all of this, as Kara said. I will give it another try. I did hear the call for playfulness and lightheartedness and fun. I would love that as well, probably. But I should say that I needed so much of your input that I appreciated that circle of feedback where you are. And it's wonderful that we have people that are novices, people that are from different fields, different backgrounds. I don't know if we cover the spectrum of what our participants will look like, but I think it's a good start. So I thank you everybody for being patient with my confusion.
Well, thank you. Yay, let's give her a round of applause here. We can, yay. Really appreciate your, tackling this, sticking with it and working on it. So yeah, we should probably I'm very grateful for everyone's contribution, and yeah, and and the quest. It's sort of this ongoing exploration. So thanks for that. So next week we have relational empathy, right? DJ, you're going to be presenting something on that. Are we
Mhm.
all set for that? Yeah, so looking forward to
Sure.
that. So I guess that's all I've got. I guess we're good with anything else real quick before we end. Yeah, Kara.
Just as an overall comment, I loved, and I don't know if everybody did this and I maybe missed it, but having the empathy has a lot of facets, and here's one of them as a starter to every one of these. I thought that was really delicious at the beginning of this. Okay, that was it.
Yeah, Lou.
Actually, I did have a comment, which is that what Kara was saying about believing raised in me the awareness that I have a lot of faith. So, and nonviolent communication has a teaching that all human beings have the same basic needs, and my faith in that that idea, my belief in it, is part of what helps me see the humanity in other people, even when I'm disagreeing with them, or wow, this person seems really different. It helps me dig for what might be common among us. And so the role of faith or belief, faith came up for me like almost like a spiritual, because it isn't just that I believe it, I have a lot of faith in that. And it has served me really well in my life. And it's that thing about believing, if you believe that, like that we have commonality, it helps with being empathic. So I just wanted to say that because it came up for me pretty strongly.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And for me, it's not just belief, it's been my ongoing experience. So that gives me, a real groundedness in that. Yeah, DJ?
Yeah, so Lou, what would you say, and this kind of feeds into relational empathy, so I'm just going to put like food for thought out there. What would you say in response to, you have one segment of the population or an individual of one segment, an individual in another segment, and one individual is verbally abusing the other?
Meaning they're saying like what to them?
Are they saying what?
They're like saying what? What are they saying to them?
Oh, sexual harassment online against women.
So you're asking what would I say to the person who's doing that?
What you just said about empathy, about connecting to that humanity, right?
Yeah.
How can we create something, some kind of environment or some kind of questioning or some kind of something, right? That would help the abuser recognize the humanity in the victim.
So they need to connect with the humanity in themselves first, probably, would be my guess. And so I might be challenged showing some empathy or having empathy for someone who is being verbally, abusive to someone else. The case where I would have to dig, what sort of need is this person trying to fulfill by talking to this person in this manner? What is going on in them that they would be talking in this way? And that I don't know the answer to that. Actually, part of the reason I asked you, what is the person actually saying, is because that gives me a clue. Like what words they're actually saying would give me a clue to what need they might be trying to fulfill. And people do all kinds of things that actually don't fulfill their needs in an attempt to meet them. So it's probably, I would guess, a desire to express some kind of agency. They're trying to express some kind of agency by going at somebody. But that's just my guess. Well,
could it be power? As simple as power?
Yeah, except that power is a strategy. So power isn't a need. Power is a strategy. Power is a way of trying to get a need met. And I use the word agency instead of power, but yes, those are kind of the same thing. And I don't know what need, I would need to observe the person and listen to them and hear what they're saying to guess what their need might be.
Well, just, give me like a random kind of need, just from your experience, what would be a need in someone who is sexually harassing someone they don't know,
Connection.
someone they don't even know?
A need for connection. So a lot of times people try to connect and they do things like talking too much or telling a joke that is offensive, and they're trying to connect with people and they create disconnection by doing it. And so, right, the person that's harassing, that person may actually be saying something that he thinks it's connecting. He thinks it's going to be, the person's going to like it, or it's playful. They think of it as playful or whatever, and it isn't. It's offensive to the person. But it's probably a need for connection, would be my guess.
Right on the mark.
Six.
I just used a lot of imagination there.
That was very
I used a lot of imagination.
Hmm.
To be continued. This is a great topic to hold those thoughts, and we shall
Mhm.
continue with them.
Yeah.
Can be in part of next circle. So
Mhm.
just maybe
Okay.
some jazz hands as we close. Thanks everybody, and look forward to seeing you all next
Okay.
time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
And
Thanks,
Violetta,
everyone.
can you
Thanks,
stay
Violetta.
back up? Sorry. I see you, Jana.